What's up guys, I'm Sega Lord X, and in this episode we're going to be talking about first-person shooters on the Sega Saturn. Now this is not a genre that the Saturn is known to have a pile of games in, despite the fact that it has some really good entries. We're going to be looking at 8 games. Let's get started. Acclaim would release the probe-developed Alien Trilogy in August of 1996. As far as licensed games go, this one ain't half bad. It's based on the first 3 films of the movie universe, broken up into sections with various objectives. Aliens and facehuggers roam the levels as your adversaries, but there are other enemies to worry about as well. The history of this one is weird. It started out as a 32X game, but once it was clear that the add-on was going nowhere, it was moved over to the other 32-bit platforms. It also has the distinction of being one of the games that supposedly only uses one of the Saturn CPUs. You wouldn't know it from how the game runs, however, as Alien Trilogy moves along at a pretty decent pace. The graphics are also not too bad, though some repetition in textures can make some areas difficult to navigate. The soundtrack is really good, consisting of low-key and ominous tunes that add a ton to the atmosphere. It suffers from early first-person shooter staples of switch throwing and maze wandering, but given the game a little leeway for its age, I came away even after all these years having enjoyed the experience. Many of the games like Alien Trilogy that were multi-platform often have the Saturn version a mess beside the PS1 release, yet Alien Trilogy holds its own. You won't find anything here mind-blowing overall, and it certainly isn't a hidden gem by any stretch of the imagination, but it plays well, looks good, and has a soundtrack worth listening to. The best part of this release is the price is affordable in every region, with complete in-box copies going $20 to $30 buy it now, and even cheaper if you are patient for the auctions. That makes Alien Trilogy a great place to start for your first-person shooter fix on the Sega Saturn. Sega of America would publish Congo the Movie for the Saturn in March of 1996. Developed by Jumpin' Jack Software and Sega Away Team, I absolutely loathe this abomination. Everything about this experience is painful. The graphics are a pixelated mess across both the environment and the enemies, but even at distance things still look bad. The enemies look like laughable renders of dollar store toys, and the environment all runs together in a mashup of green and browns. Suffice to say, the ugliness of the experience doesn't help the gameplay either, and hot damn does this garbage play terrible. The follow the path gameplay comes off as lazy as anything I've ever experienced. Worse, many of these paths are just dead ends that require backtracking for no other reason than to create the illusion of content. Combat is best described as trifling, and at worst hateful. While you follow the path of the game, enemies come running out of the invisible walls all around you. This is basically where the entire challenge of the game comes from, fighting stuff in areas you just walked through 2 seconds before. The sluggish movement makes this nearly unbearable, as just aiming to kill these enemies that constantly run at you from the sides and behind you a pain in the ass. The story is tied together by full motion video sequences that explain what's going on, but this video doesn't look good, nor does it motivate you to see more of it. If Alien Trilogy was a surprise for a licensed property, I'd argue that Congo the Movie is its exact opposite. This game was exactly what was wrong with the Saturn in the West. Instead of the powers that be making games that had made Sega a force to be taken seriously during the 16-bit era, they slapped together software like this that had no appeal to any diehard Sega fan. So poorly received was this game, that the European release was cancelled after being advertised, and a Japanese release wasn't even considered. The teams that developed this were also responsible for other Saturn winners, like Ginwar and Blackfire. And that, my friends, should tell you everything you need to know. The Saturn would get a port of Doom in March of 1997, developed by Rage Software and published by GT Interactive. This comprises both Doom and Doom 2 into one game, with new music added for effect. Unfortunately, what should have been a clear home run for the Saturn is an abysmal failure in nearly every way. The first thing you'll encounter upon playing Doom is the awful frame rate. I mean, this is some rough stuff here, with frames seemingly in the single digits at times, especially in the bigger and more complicated stages. You also lose the cool colored light sourcing and transparency effects of the PS1 release, leaving Doom on the Saturn a poor running, vanilla experience visually. The core of Doom is intact, which of course means that there is some fun to be had. When the frame rate isn't completely tanking the gameplay, Doom is as fun as it ever was. But tank the gameplay it does far too often, meaning you'll be cursing the game far more than praising it. The truly sad part is that there actually existed a Doom for the Saturn that was designed to take advantage of the machine's VDP1 texture ability, but John Carmack, one of the original developers of Doom, didn't like the way it looked, forcing the game to run in what was virtually a software mode, where the SH2 CPUs did all the heavy lifting, and none of the Saturn's other hardware was used to any real benefit. This leaves us with one of the most disappointing ports for the Saturn. The Japanese release of the game is often considered the superior version, fixing some of the issues with the North American release. Don't get your hopes up too high, however, as I own the Japanese variant, and it still runs like absolute garbage. Duke Nukem 3D would show up on the Saturn in August of 1997. Published by Sega themselves, this one was developed by Lobotomy Software, a company that would make a name for themselves by creating a proprietary engine known as Slave Driver. This engine would power Duke Nukem 3D here, and shows off exactly what could be done if the Saturn hardware was harnessed correctly. This is arguably the best home console version of Duke from that generation, having none of the problems most ports to the Saturn usually exhibited. The frame rate is solid, the textures look good, the special effects look great, and there were even added features such as online netlink co-op and deathmatch modes. The Saturn's 3D analog controller is supported, and there is a multiplayer minigame hidden away called Death Tank Zwei. The basic gameplay of Duke Nukem 3D isn't particularly different from previous first-person shooter entries, like Doom. You'll be hitting switches and finding keycards like you always have, but the real fun here is the weapon selection and items. You have your standard shotgun and missile launchers, but the addition of laser tripwires and pipe bombs adds some much-needed variance and ways to dispatch your foes. The story is straight out of a bad 1970s sci-fi flick. Aliens have shown up and kidnapped the Earth's women for nefarious reasons. And though the game doesn't mention it directly, this is actually the third entry into the popular PC series. It's one of the more playable first-person shooter experiences from the 32-bit console generation, and an absolute must-own for the Saturn. Rarely did we get ports built for the hardware like this on Saturn, much less one of such a popular franchise. Lobotomy Software's work here is a glimpse at the possibilities had Sega given third parties top-end support to understand what it took to make Saturn bring their games to life. Had developers had these tools early on, that generation could have turned out radically different. What remains a mystery to me is that the game has not skyrocketed in price over the years. A complete in-box copy is easily had under $50, and well worth it. You can do far, far worse on the system. GT Interactive would return with another first-person shooter release, Hexen, dropped in March of 1997. This one was developed by Raven Software, and thankfully turned out a lot better than the Saturn's Doom port. Hexen is actually a sequel to a game called Heretic, a first-person shooter that incorporates RPG elements. You choose between a fighter, a cleric, or a mage, each with various attributes that include speed, armor, magic, and strength. The puzzle-heavy gameplay is based on finding items and switches within each level to progress, much of which is guarded by traps that must be overcome to proceed. Combat incorporates both melee and magic attacks, giving you a fair bit of choice in how to go about dispatching your foes. As I said previously, this one runs a ton better than Doom on the Saturn, and looks better too. There's more variety in textures, and everything is overall more colorful and detailed. The frame rate can chug in the larger, more open areas, but never becomes unplayable. The biggest hurdle you'll find in this one is the difficulty. It's no joke, with just the stage design itself presenting a fair bit of challenge to navigate. Enemies don't go down easy either, and ammo isn't just laying around in abundance for you to just spray everything from a distance. You'll need to play this one almost like a survival horror experience. Pace yourself, take your time, conserve your items and ammo, and don't go try killing every single enemy you see. With a game plan in tow and a little patience, Hexen can be a great first-person shooter experience. First appearing in September of 1996, Powerslave would make its world debut. Developed by Lobotomy Software and published by BMG Interactive in Europe and Playmates Interactive in North America, this would be the very first time Saturn owners would see the slave driver engine in action. Set in Egypt, you are tasked by the spirit of King Ramses to fight an evil alien invasion intent on conquering the Earth. Along the way, you'll gain special powers and weapons to better prepare you for the battles ahead. Powerslave's gameplay is best described as a Metroid Prime-like first-person shooter. Completely non-linear, you have a full run of all the areas available in the game. Many of these areas have parts that are inaccessible without certain powers, and backtracking is mandatory to open up new exploration opportunities. Exploration is key to the story as well, with hidden items that must be found to get the very best ending. The stage design features great verticality, which is often used to hide hidden areas. Powerslave is a stunning graphical presentation on Saturn, having both a smooth frame rate and great light sourcing effects. Texture work and enemy design start slow, but once you are 3 or 4 areas in, really start to shine. The sound work here is great too, especially the voice work that conveys the story and the in-game conversations. The stage music fits the theme and adds great atmosphere to the setting. There's no question about it, Powerslave was a great audio and visual showpiece for the Saturn at the time. with only some mesh texturing on the water being an eyesore. The Metroid-style design made it one of my favorite experiences for the Saturn. It was so different from the typical first-person shooter Doom-style blastathon. Each level had multiple routes to take that could lead to multiple other areas and hidden treasures. This was also released on the PS1 and PC shortly after, but the Saturn version is the best one to own in my opinion. The Saturn version runs better consistently and has a better overall level design. The PC release has radical alterations to level design and graphics, and though still a decent game, is almost a completely different experience. Lobotomy Software's work on the Saturn was again a glimpse at what could have been, and Powerslave was a AAA experience at a time when Western games were the bottom of the barrel on the Sega Saturn. Unfortunately for those of you wanting a legit North American copy for your library, eBay pricing has soared on this one in recent years. You'll be hard pressed to find a mint copy for under $100, though the European and Japanese releases tend to be a little cheaper. Lobotomy Software would return for a third and final outing on the Saturn with the Sega-published Quake in November of 1997. This impossibly good port of the PC game that required far superior hardware used the ever-respectable Slave Driver engine that Lobotomy had customized for Powerslave and Duke Nukem 3D. It now fully supported 3D polygonal enemies and items, and even featured colored light sourcing not found in the original PC release. Aside from a few changes in level layouts, this is a very competent single-player game of Quake. It has 4 new levels exclusive to the Saturn release, as well as 3D analog pad support. Despite the impressive use of the Saturn's hardware here, there are some shortcomings. The polygon enemies take a hit in detail, especially at distance, and the game of course runs in low resolution. When you take control of Quake, you are in a hub world that exists to allow you to choose your difficulty and the episode you want to play. Once you begin, the gameplay is extremely similar to Doom, though now with more varied environments, the ability to look up and down, water areas, and more verticality to tie it all together. Its dark and foreboding atmosphere is punctuated well by its tense and pulse-pounding soundtrack, though I do wish it had more variety. This game actually had a few different teams trying to make it for the Saturn, but after failing to get the game running well enough, it was turned over to the geniuses at Lobotomy to get the job done. Rumors are they completed a PS1 version of this as well, though it never saw the light of day. Quake is certainly a throwback to the simple run-and-gun days of the first-person shooter, where switch turning and keycards ruled the experience. It lacks the fantastic power-ups and open-world design elements of Powerslave, but what is here is definitely worth playing. The tough difficulty and tons of levels ensure enough content to keep you busy for a while. It goes for around $50 complete in North America, a price that may put off many of you. PAL gamers can usually get it a bit cheaper, but just like Duke Nukem 3D, the Japanese Saturn never saw a release of it. Early in the Saturn's life, Micronet would develop the Sega-published first-person shooter Daedalus, otherwise known as Robotica, in March of 1995. I'd import this one the day it was released in Japan. Excited for a new game for my growing Saturn import collection, I went in with visions of an exciting, fast-paced shooter where I gunned down rogue robots in photorealistic environments. The game magazine shots of Daedalus looked great, and I had no issue dumping the $80 import price for it, and another $40 on top of it for next day shipping. And boy was I a damn fool for it. Deadalus was anything but fast-paced and exciting. It was boring corridor wandering that amounted to finding the level key and moving on. Enemies would simply pace the rooms waiting for you to show up, then basically beeline it to your position while you gunned it down. It wasn't that Daedalus was an awful game though, it just wasn't what I expected it to be. It's a restrained experience that never really takes off no matter how deep into the game you get. The graphics aren't bad, but the overuse of the same environment details mean you are looking at the same graphics for long periods of time. The music has a nice jingle to it, but it's extremely repetitive. Because of how I was introduced to this game, coupled with the stupid expenditure I put into it, my view of this one is likely unfairly skewed. I have put a fair bit of time into it though, and find that there are much better experiences in the genre on the Saturn. With that said, I can also easily admit that there are much worse as well. For those wanting to take the plunge, you don't have to dump the crazy cash I did to play it, with every single region's version being rarely more expensive than a tenner. Okay guys, first-person shooters on the Sega Saturn, yay or nay? Definitely yay. There are some really good entries here, and not just the stuff that was made by Lobotomy Software. You have stuff like Alien Trilogy and Hexen that play really good and are affordable. Now I didn't cover every first-person shooter for the system here. I wanted to start out with this 8 because it was a good mix of really good solid games and a handful of games that I think you should stay away from. But either way you go, first-person shooters on the Sega Saturn, there are some real gems in here to pay attention to. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching. I'll catch you next time.